Welcome to Conversations in Mind. This is a space for conscious inquiry, where metaphysics, new thought, and the science of mind meet real life. In a world calling for deeper awareness, we explore the nature of consciousness, the power of thought, and the presence of spirit moving through everyday experience. And now, here are your hosts, Barb Bue and Mark Gilbert.
Well, hello, everybody. So here we are again this week asking you, what if your mind is more than just a collection of thoughts? And what if it is the gateway to a completely new way of living? Welcome to Conversations in Mind. I'm Reverend Barb. I'm joined by my friend and fellow minister, Mark Gilbert. And we seek to sort of demystify and do the history of and deep dives into new thought, the science and soul of consciousness, how our minds work, and whatever questions you throw at us. So if you're a longtime seeker or curious about the power of your own perspective, we're going to dive into mind. And today we're going to kind of dive into new thought itself. And our question for the day is new thought a Christian tradition? And this has some wide-ranging conversation and thought. So I know you're queued up on this one because you are the historian here. So I'll just let you go. What do you think? Are we or are we not?
Well, I can cut to the chase on my answer, and my answer is it depends on what you mean by Christianity.
Clear as mud, always.
Yeah, I'm going to put a caveat out there and cover myself. But if we ask, is new thought a Christian faith, religion, tradition, etc.? It's one of those things where it depends on who you ask, and then when you ask them, it depends on how they define Christianity. And the bottom line for me is that if you took somebody who was a devout fundamentalist Christian and you offered new thought to them as a teaching, they would certainly not see this as Christian. Yet on the other hand, even Ernest Holmes himself used to speak, being a student of Ernest Holmes and researcher of him, he frequently cited that we were a Christian religion, a Christian faith. So, and I can go into a little bit of the history on why I felt like he said that. But even in modern days, I know there are many of our ministers in the movement who often will present, from the pulpit, their message that we're a Christian religion. And so it gets down to, again, how do you define it? And if we look at pure fundamentalist Christianity, Bible is inerrant word of God. You have to take everything literally. Jesus died for your sins. You've got to be reborn and claim Jesus as your Savior. None of that will you find within New Thought or Science of Mind. And for many people, that is the fundamental aspect of Christianity. It's those pieces of it. But on the flip side, what many New Thought folks say is that we go back to the real true mystical teachings of Jesus and use his actual quotes that show that he had a deeper message than what has over the last 2,000 years morphed into the type of Christianity that's currently presented in much of the world. So it really depends. Some people will say yes, some people will say no. When we say yes, I think it's because we're hearkening back to what we see as what we define as the true teachings of Jesus, and not necessarily a lot of the stuff presented by Christian churches today.
Well, there we go. We're done. Podcast over.
The commercial and go home, right?
All right. Be a great day. No, I think you're right. Obviously, you're right on this in many ways. The Science of Mind textbook itself is hugely Christian, but biblically referenced, and has a whole section in the back on that. But and I think though that we should go back and also talk about I feel like there's been an arc in the teachings, sort of movement more away from that, from call it Christian faith tradition within Science of Mind. Yeah. Unity, I think, has stayed a little more biblically centric.
Yes.
But I'm not as familiar with what I've seen of Unity and conversations with Unity folks particularly while I was working at home office and working with them. They do still have that a little more of that arc. I don't know anything about where divine science has landed and all of that, but I think as a movement, our ministers have moved further and further away from that over time. And many of us now are like, no. I mean, I used to do the whole metaphysical interpretations of Bible stories thing, and I'm like, I felt, in many ways, just making things up, right? And is that really what they meant? We don't know. I like looking at all of that from the historical point that the Bible was a bunch of campfire stories. So that's kind of where I come from in it personally. So, and I think a lot of people now, particularly our younger ministers, agree in that. And of course, there are people that really lean in, that do find comfort in that bridge between what they grew up with and this. I think for me, when I was early in ministry, it was important to me because I was in a fairly conservative part of Colorado to bridge some of those teachings and give people some other way to look at those stories and to explain those stories from a different perspective to their family who were worried about them going to hell, and then starting with, we don't believe in hell. So that's like a whole other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Hell is not a place, but hell is a state of mind.
Hell is a state of mind. We do it to ourselves here a lot.
Yeah. A lot of what you said just now, I agree with, Barb. I think that when you look at the threads of New Thought, again, I'm not as well versed with divine science, but I do think that in all of the early founders of the three major threads of New Thought, from their historical perspective, they all did tie their teachings and saw them coming out of Christianity and the teachings of Jesus. And so I think both Holmes and as well as Melinda Kramer and the Brooks sisters and Divine Science and the Fillmores and Unity, they all valued the Christian message and saw what they were teaching as Christian. I think that the Unity's often been called the Unity School or Church of Christianity.
Yeah.
They bring Christianity into the title. And I know there has, from some contexts and threads I've followed, I know that sometimes there is a debate within Unity about going back to the original teachings as opposed to the tension to try to bring it into a more modern language. But if you're reading the Fillmores and some of that aspect of New Thought, you do feel more of a Christian thread. There's sort of a style of writing that brings words and phrases and things of that nature in that archens and connects with the Bible. And so it allows it as an easy inroad for somebody who has come through a Christian faith to see that as language that can feel comfortable to them. And I think the same thing when Holmes taught that or said that we were a Christian faith, although I truly believe he believed that in his heart of hearts, he would always go on with words that described how we were different. But I think he said that for marketing, for many purposes, just like you were talking about it. When you're looking here, he was speaking to groups in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and we're a predominantly Christian country.
In the United States, yes.
In the United States.
Very U.S.-centric conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, here he is in Southern California doing lectures at the Beverly Theater in Beverly Hills. Yes, we're Christian because he's right in the Mecca of a Christian country. But but I also think that there is still some of that today, and there are ministers who are attracted to the metaphysical teachings and the descriptions of the words of Jesus from a more metaphysical standpoint. And I can enjoy that to a degree, but it doesn't speak to me as much as other things do. But I do see and use it in my own ways in conversations with people as a connecting voice to say, well, yes, we all go back to Jesus. We just disagree from the point forward of how we're interpreting his words. You tend to look at it, you very devout fundamentalist Christian person, you tend to interpret him much differently than New Thought does. And, let's agree to disagree, on this.
Yeah. And I've wondered, as I was thinking about this topic, I was wondering, like, okay, I thought I was thinking about that a lot. Like, all these people were teaching starting in the 20s and 30s, where being not Christian in the United States would have just been not okay, and it would have scared people. So, and everybody grew up in it, right? So, what I started wondering is if would Holmes have moved as far away from that over time as, for instance, I have, or and a lot of people I know have, or would he have stayed in that track? And he was a learning, growing human being through his entire career and through his entire ministry. So, and he was heavily influenced by Eastern tradition. So I think as it became more okay to talk, my gut sense is that as it became more okay to talk about those things in that wider way, that he would have done so. I mean, he was a devotee of Yogananda. You can see the Bhagavad Gita in some of his work. Like, there's layers of those things, and what's his face from England was heavily influenced by
Thomas Troward.
Thank you. Yeah. So I would I think that Holmes probably would have continued to integrate more publicly those other traditions and thinking, and probably moved further also. I don't know when Lamsa's Bible was. I should have looked that up actually, as I was thinking about that. We all had to get a copy of the Lamsa version of the Bible, right? Because it was supposedly more directly from the Aramaic. I don't know when that was published, but I think I'd like to think that Ernest he would have continued to learn and grow. So I think, in a lot of things, including this.
Yeah. You're hitting on things that I've sort of come to the same conclusion on, and a lot of it, as you well know, I was the one who helped put together the Ernest Holmes Solomar book, and actually pulled this out because I was thinking about some of the quotes he had in here. That there are actually three quotes where Holmes talks about Billy Graham, and when he was speaking at a Solomar. For those of you who may not know what I'm talking about, Ernest Holmes spoke at summer conferences at the Asilomar Conference Center in California, in Monterey, and did that throughout the 1950s, from 54 through 59. And this book compiles all of his talks and classes at Asilomar. But in my work towards researching that particular book, one of the things I came to the conclusion on, Barb, was that I felt like in his later years, he leaned more heavily into Vedanta, the Eastern teachings of India. Yep. And although the Indian teachings, I think, were such a strong influence on, as you mentioned, Troward early in Holmes' career, it was actually an Indian teacher by the name of Sri Aurobindo that read every year. He read his very thick book, The Life Divine. It's like over 1,000 pages, and Holmes was known to have gone through that book once a year for the last few years of his life. And many of his talks at Asilomar reference Aurobindo and Aurobindo's teachings. And I find, and as I look at and study Holmes, I see him leaning more heavily in his later years into Eastern religions, and specifically Vedanta. And I wanted to share one of the three mentions of I'm going to read a quote if you're okay. Yeah. This is from, he was teaching a mysticism class in 1957, and he got to talking about Billy Graham. And I think this sort of like speaks to a little bit about, even though he says we're Christian, here's what he says about Billy Graham. He says, I thought when I listened to Billy Graham last Saturday night, that is a sweet guy. And I thought that he is a sweet, wonderful, absolutely sincere guy, and I'm sure he's doing good. Then I got to thinking it over the next day, and I still thought he was sweet, etc. But then I thought, let's approach this from the non-committal viewpoint without prejudice, for or against, or emotion, but just thinking he's a sweet guy, which he is. And let's forget all that. And from a non-critical viewpoint, because you might not happen to believe it, let's see what it is under analysis. And do you know what my analysis was? That the greatest spiritual stupidity that can be exhibited by man, and the highest form of intellectual arrogance that can be entertained by man, is for anybody, sincere or insincere, to believe anybody else is going to a place less good than he, meaning hell.
Wow. Oh my God, I love that.
And then it goes on.
Honest.
There is no greater intellectual arrogance or spiritual stupidity than this conceivable, hang on, did I miss something? Than this conceivable, because it deals with eternity. If it only dealt with you falling down and breaking an arm today, that'd be a passing event. But when it deals with the eternal verities, there can be no greater stupidity, no greater harm can come to the mind of man. And so he was really calling out the people, telling people you're going to go to
I
hell.
did not know that one. Oh, I love that. Holy cow.
And I will say there's two other references of Billy Graham in his talks from Asilomar, and both of them are it's a sweet guy, but he's wrong. It's the essence of what he's saying.
And not only is he wrong, he's not kind. He's not so kind after all. Yeah. Wow. Okay, I'm a little stunned right now. So,
while you're sitting with that, I will say the other thing that sort of comes up, and I've noticed in a lot of with a lot of New Thought, people come into New Thought, is they come in from traditional Christian religions which they distance themselves from their past, and when they come in, they are still wounded. They are wounded, and I intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know what Christian ministers realize, but there are a lot of people who come in and listen to their message and get wounded by the words they're hearing, that if I don't believe what you're believing, I'm going to burn in the hell for eternity, or I'm going to be excluded from this group, or and so there is a sense of being disowned by the church if you don't accept the teachings, with 100% certainty. And I think a lot of times certain Christian ministers, at least in the past, didn't reference or realize the harm they were doing to people's psychology by the very nature of that. And I know you and I have both experienced, many people have come into New Thought, and to this degree, even though we teach oneness and there's a truth in all religions, etc., there are many people who still feel sort of an inner bias against Christianity because of the wounding of their youth.
Yeah, I think most of our communities are built on post-Christian people, call it, and I think that for a while there's a certain amount of comfort in sort of a bridge to that, but for some people also that bridge is they don't want that either. They don't want to hear any of it because of all of that. And, it's that thing of weaponizing the Bible and weaponizing those teachings, what as somebody used to call it, being hit with the buckle of the Bible belt, right? Mm-hmm. And that's true for a lot of people, especially if you're not white, heterosexual, all those things. So yeah, I think that it would be interesting to try to frame New Thought without Christianity. It is interesting to frame New Thought without Christianity. And what I'm finding now, what I think is happening now, though, too, is that we have the people who are coming, who are in their 30s and 40s, are not coming out of Christian tradition because their parents weren't in it anymore either.
Right.
And they're just coming because they're looking for spiritual community and ways to connect with people who believe that there's a life force and an energy and that can talk about science and physics and also talk about love and this and spiritual connection, the way, we've talked about that a lot in this in previous episodes of this program. But I think that is more who we are becoming as a movement, at least the Science of Mind part, is a movement of love and connection and spiritual teaching, but I would say spiritual practice as much as anything else, and looking inward at what moves us,
and
how we connect.
Yeah, there's a point I want to add to that, but I think what we'll do is maybe take a short break here and just acknowledge that we come to folks on the New Thought Media Network, and we really, really, really want you to support the New Thought Media Network. It is a platform that is used by many New Thought teachers to share these teachings in various forms and manners. There's great prayer work that's being done by people on the network. There's lots of other programs which we encourage you to check out. We hope you're enjoying this program. We're following a little brief commercial, has a QR code in there. You can pause the video if you're watching it on video and point your camera at it and donate some money and help support the New Thought Media Network. It helps keep this network going. And by doing that QR code, it lets them know that you were showing appreciation to our show as well.
We hope you're enjoying Conversations in Mind. This program is made possible by the New Thought Media Network, a nonprofit that's supporting conscious, spiritual media. If you'd like to support this work, just scan the QR code to make a donation. It lets the network know you like this show and helps them to continue bringing you this type of content. You can also go to ntmedia.org and click on Donate. Thank you for being part of the conversation. Now, back to the show.
Hey, I want to add to that even though we talk about the QR code, that we do recognize many of you are listening on audio-only podcast. And so we do remind you these programs do come to you on your favorite podcast program network. So wherever you get your podcast, you can go and subscribe there. And if you don't find it on your podcast platform, shoot us a note or contact us, and we'll make sure that it gets on there. Also, we love your comments and feedbacks and your likes and shares. So if you're enjoying what you're finding here, be sure to share this in social media and other ways so that we can expand our reach and people who would benefit from this program can find it.
Yes, and we love your questions, and we'll bring them live. And if you have topics you'd like us to take on, we're happy to entertain that as well. So. You queued yourself up with a thought about
well,
our Christianness or not.
Well, one of the things I think I've mentioned in previous programs that was very meaningful to me was the teaching of spiral dynamics, and it showed a series of worldviews that people move through. And very briefly, what is pertinent for our conversation right now is that what it showed through data is that people tend to move sequentially through a worldview that resonates first with traditional religion. If they move out of that, some people stay there. But if people evolve out of that, they move to a state where they don't really get into religion, but they were very secular, and they look at science and rational thought and things of that nature as being the meaning for their life. And if they grow out of that, they tend to move towards a more broader, expanded kind of spirituality where they look for God is in everything. They look for an experience of God in their own lives, etc. And then there's higher stages as well that goes into. So the model shows, if anything, a sequence that people go from Christian churches to scientific thinking, and then they become the type of people who perhaps come to New Thought. New Thought. So when we say people come out of Christianity, they often come through an inroad through science and rational thought, and then hit New Thought. Whereas there's people, if they weren't ever coming through Christianity, or they at least in the model, they would have come through a stage that would have been seeing things in very black and white thinking, even if they didn't get into Christianity, and then got into rational thought, and then they come to us. So they don't have the wounding, perhaps, that I was talking about with Christian churches, but they have come through sort of a rational, scientific viewpoint. But either way they come, what we have are most people who approach New Thought are recognizing that a secular worldview doesn't hold answer all the questions of why we exist, where we're going, and so forth. So they go out looking in the marketplace of ideas, and we become one of those things that is touched on, and these people explore and look into, and many find resonance with them. And so I think that it's only not natural that a lot of folks either came out of Christianity and find us, many come out of Christianity and stay in only physical matter is real. There's no such thing as God, no matter how you define them. They may stay in that mindset. But if they feel that limited at all, then they flow into New Thought. And then the question becomes, in relative to this conversation, does it behoove us to still call ourselves Christian if we feel like people left Christianity because they felt like it was too limited, too dogmatic, didn't define life in a way that gave meaning for them? So maybe we're doing a disservice by stressing our Christian aspects.
Do we stress that? I don't see us stressing that any. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't.
Well, no, I'm saying that there's probably whether I know some do and some don't. And you were saying a minute ago that it might be better, if we reframed things not to. And I think I'm agreeing with you in a way, is that it would seem like if people have moved through sort of a flow of mind views to come to New Thought after having released Christianity, and seeing that didn't work for them, it would seem that it seems only natural that we wouldn't stress Christianity in these days, like Holmes did back in the 50s, for example.
Yeah, I haven't read, we used to spend, I think, I don't know, my sense of it has been that there's been a pretty big shift in the entry point, the consciousness of the entry point of people who are starting to come to our communities. And because when I started, 35 years ago or more, when foundations class, we were still having conversations about whether heaven and hell were real, and conversations about the savior doctrine. And anymore, people who come in are like, yeah, no, I don't believe in that anyway. So those conversations are not as encompassing or big or life shifting as they used to be. I think people come in now a lot more in alignment already with about those, with that's not real,
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. I think that there is an aspect where people understand and feel and sense about a non-material reality that we can touch into, and they see it in a more expansive definition of God. And many of the basic concepts that are taught in New Thought, people walk in the doors now having been exposed to those ideas already through other media.
And believe them or embrace them in a completely different sort of level. I mean, I remember early on, having long conversations about, what do you mean there's no hell? Here's what we think. But now that's just not even a blip. I don't remember the last time I talked to anybody about that, it's just not even a blip. So, which says to me that the consciousness of all of us is changing. I would call it rising, but changing, and worldview is changing slowly but surely. That wheel continues to turn. And so I don't know why we would. I know in Unity, there's a big conversation about, do we go back to that? Do we not go back to that? But I don't think we ever really embraced it so fully that it would be a going back to. And I think if somebody decided that science of mind or the movement of Centers for Spiritual Living was going to embrace Christianity in a new way, that we would lose a lot of attention. We
would lose a lot of people, a lot of followers. It would break it apart. I really truly believe. I know it gets back to when I said a lot of people feel wounded, and I know many people who still don't like it when their local communities bring up and stress Christian underpinnings.
Totally. Well, and also I want to say, if you're one of those people who has not liked that, and one of your local communities that you've gone to is that way, find another one.
Yeah.
Because that is the one thing that is wonderful, sometimes frustrating, but also wonderful about Centers for Spiritual Living, is that, there's a very big sandbox that our ministers play in, and you can find someone who resonates with you, in the way that their style of teaching and what their focus is. So,
I've known ministers who they've gotten deep value from exploring the Bible and exploring Jesus's words, the metaphysical interpretations of the Bible, and love teaching that stuff.
Mhm.
But I do believe that they seem to be fewer than, when I first came into the movement. And
Yeah, I used to. I don't know about you, but I used to, and I used to love some of it. I just feel like I've moved. I don't want to be like hierarchical in any way in this conversation about this, but I've moved beyond that, which for me is an evolution of my consciousness and awareness that feels better.
Yeah. No, I get it. If it's a point where it doesn't feed you, then you have to go into the areas where you feel fed. And I think a minister has to, when they're presenting something, they have to present something that speaks to their heart and where they are.
Yeah.
And it's not to say it's good, bad, right or wrong, better
Right.
or anything. It's just different, and where that person particularly is.
And the beauty of it is that we can hold so much of that diversity of thinking within our movement, which is something that I actually really appreciate. Don't always agree with, but appreciate.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, Barb, and I don't want to take us too far into a political world, but there's in recent years, last 20, 30 years, the rise of the religious right in our country, which is so closely aligned to the fundamentalist faith of Christianity, there is sometimes a pushback in that religious right and their message of exclusion that can also have that impact of like saying, well, I would normally teach this, but and I don't know if it's conscious or not, but I would have to wonder if sometimes there's not a reaction to what we see as the negativity of religious right teachings, trying to tie Jesus into an exclusive message when his message really was about love and inclusion.
Right.
And so then maybe we then turn away from Jesus because of its prominence among the fundamentalist Christian right.
Well, and unfortunately, that brand of Christianity has become the predominant conversation. Where for many, many years, the Methodist middle, I would call it,
right,
was a lot more prevalent and may still be more prevalent in terms of attendance and people who are engaged in Christian churches. But the loudness of the Christian right has drowned all of that out in a way that's unfortunate, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But,
that's true, because I think, when I would think about Christianity before, I thought about a pretty big tent, recognizing the various different denominations that existed but now when you speak of it, it seems to coalesce around this highly visible, highly vocal aspect of it. Yet I have friends who go to Christian churches and they have acknowledged the evolution within their brand of Christianity, which is more progressive liberal, side of our wing of Christian faith, that there's changes even within their communities to be more progressive. There's an evolution occurring in Christianity, and if we're willing to see it, it's just the part that we see seems to be very mired and stuck.
It's the part that gets the media attention. It's it's true on both ends of every spectrum, right? The media attention is on the extremes. So, and that's too bad, because I think it stops a lot of conversation. And there is an enormous amount of middle ground between New Thought and Christianity, as we've already talked about. Like we were built on that. Are we still that? I remember I've answered people 100 times, thousands of times, like asking me if I'm Christian and saying, depends on your definition of Christian, so now I'd probably just say no, but because I don't know, maybe I would, depends on who I'm talking to, but the conversation I actually want to have about it. If there's a doorway to a real conversation, I would open that door always. But if it's a question that is sitting in judgment, then I would just go no.
And like we've talked about in previous shows, even New Thought continues to evolve. I mean, Ernest Holmes famously said that our philosophy was open at the top. I think one of the, for better or for worse, we don't have a ecclesiastical structure that officially dictates what we believe. You know?
Right. Or debates it even. Unfortunately, we don't have a good debate going on either,
Yeah. I have seen some debate recently regarding curriculum taught in our classes. And I think if anything, that's probably the one area where we do sort of define who we are, even though we put out statements from time to time regarding worldly issues and our position on those. But we don't have a group or a body that says, oh, well, we did believe this, but we're tweaking this. And this is now our new proclamation about what we believe about X, Y, and Z. But we do tweak our curriculum. And I think the curriculum writers probably have the greatest influence in terms of what we teach in our classes. Although where the rubber hits the road is with the minister or the teacher in the classroom who gets that curriculum and decides, hey, I don't agree with that, and I'm going to go.
Nonsense. We're not doing this. Yeah. We're not doing this.
Yeah. And I think that does, that happens plenty of times. But I think in people's efforts to try to keep curriculum current and more modern in its language and references, I think sometimes it can, things can creep into it that seem to be counter to what our teachings are about. And then people can react to that. But my major point really is that we don't have a group that says, this is what we believe. And so we would never really go to Christianity in that regard because we don't have anybody who's going to point that way and say that.
No, right. And yeah.
Which is good.
It would be fun, though, to be a part of a good debate group about, what we're going to teach these days and how we're going to present ourselves in the world.
Yeah. And it's probably something that should occur is a real fulsome dialogue among our spiritual community who looks at that. And not to say that we're dictating things, but just in terms of standard curriculum that we go down that route. Yeah. I think there will always be an aspect of Jesus' teachings in it, I believe.
We do live in that country, I think if we were in another country, in an Eastern country, we would come at it from a different place. But we are and we do. Most of our people have grown up in that, and it's part of common language in the United States. It's just part of common language, and sort of assumed of most people that you have some sort of Christian background. So, which is interesting still. But, everything's evolving. Everything continues to evolve. And so back to our original question, are we a Christian movement? And I can't really answer that for Unity. I don't feel like I'm in touch enough with what's happening. But my answer personally would be not really anymore, and maybe I think this conversation actually sets the groundwork for a larger conversation amongst our ministers and leaders. But here we are.
Yes.
So I'd be very curious to hear, if you're listening to this, what your comments and feedback are about that. I would really be curious to hear from people who attend our communities and some of our ministers and practitioners, about your thoughts on this and even where you land in it.
Well said.
Thank you.
I think we'll land there for today.
We're going to land there for today. All right. It's been lovely. Please support the New Thought Media Network. Give us a few likes and questions and comments. And we really appreciate that you've spent this time with us.
Take care.